Imagine a land before maps, a land where time wasn't measured in minutes or hours, but in the cycles of the sun and moon. This land, a vast continent isolated at the bottom of the world. It was a land of rugged beauty, of rainforests teeming with life. For over 65,000 years, this land has been home to the oldest living culture on Earth. Their history is woven into the very fabric of the land, about the profound connection between people and their environment. A nation forged from a rich tapestry of cultures, striving towards a future of unity and understanding. Deep in the heart of Australia, in the rust-red deserts and lush rainforests, whispers of ancient stories fill the air. These are the stories of the Dreamtime, a sacred era when ancestral beings roamed the earth. The Dreamtime is a living presence woven into the fabric of their lives, a timeless realm where past, present and future intertwine. Imagine a time when the land itself was still forming, when mountains rose from the plains and rivers carved their way through the ancient landscape. These ancestral beings shaped the world as we know it. They created the mountains, the rivers, the plants and the animals. They brought fire to the people, taught them how to hunt and gather. The stories of the Dreamtime are a complex system of knowledge. They teach moral lessons, explain natural phenomena, and reinforce the profound connection between the Aboriginal people and their ancestral land. To understand Australia, one must first understand the Dreamtime. It is the foundation upon which Aboriginal culture is built. The Dreamtime stories are a testament to the enduring power of oral tradition. They remind us that the land is a sacred entity, a living ancestor to be respected and revered. The ancestral beings of the Dreamtime are as diverse as the Australian landscape itself. Bayame, the sky god, created rivers and mountains and taught sacred laws. The rainbow serpent carved valleys and waterholes, bringing life-giving rain. Imagine a rainbow shimmering across the vast desert sky, a symbol of hope. These stories, passed down through generations, express the Aboriginal worldview. They teach about the interconnectedness of all living things and respecting nature. Imagine a map, not etched on parchment or displayed on a screen, but etched into the very fabric of the landscape. This is the essence of the songlines, a complex network of invisible pathways that crisscross Australia. These songlines are more than just physical routes. They are living repositories of knowledge, history and spirituality, encoded in song, dance and ceremony. As Aboriginal people travel along these songlines, they keep the memory of the Dreamtime alive. For thousands of generations, Aboriginal Australians have lived in a close and sustainable relationship with their environment. Their deep knowledge of the land allowed them to thrive in a land often perceived as harsh and unforgiving. They understood they were part of a delicate web of life, ensuring the well-being of the land for future generations. This intimate knowledge was passed down orally, ensuring survival in a land of extremes. They used fire to clear undergrowth, promote new growth, and attract game. Their relationship with the land was deeply spiritual, treating it with reverence and respect. The year is 1770. A lone ship, its white sails billowing in the wind, appears on the horizon. The Aboriginal people, watching from the shore, had seen ships before. But this ship, under the command of James Cook, would change everything. Cook claimed the eastern coast for the British Crown, planting the seeds for a new era. In 1788, a fleet of 11 ships arrived in Botany Bay, marking the beginning of European settlement. The newcomers were a source of both curiosity and apprehension for the Aboriginal people. For the Aboriginal people, it was the beginning of a long and painful dispossession. The clash of cultures and the struggle for land would shape the Australian story for centuries. The arrival of the first fleet in 1788 marked the beginning of profound change in Australia. For the Aboriginal people, the arrival of these strange newcomers was a source of curiosity and apprehension. Imagine Aboriginal hunters watching from the eucalyptus trees as the tall ships dropped anchor. The Europeans were equally intrigued by the Indigenous inhabitants. They described them as noble savages, marveling at their skills and deep knowledge of the land. But fascination soon gave way to fear, misunderstanding, and conflict. Europeans, driven by cultural superiority, viewed Aboriginal people as obstacles. Aboriginal people saw the newcomers as a threat to their existence. The stage was set for a clash of cultures with far-reaching consequences. The cultural divide between the Aboriginal people and the European settlers ran deep, fueled by fundamentally different worldviews. The Aboriginal people, with their deep spiritual connection to the land, could not comprehend the European notion of land as a commodity. For the settlers, the land was seen as an empty canvas, ripe for the taking. This fundamental difference in perspective lay at the heart of the conflict. The early decades of European settlement in Australia were marked by relentless expansion, displacing Aboriginal people and clearing forests. The discovery of gold in the 1850s triggered a massive influx of immigrants, transforming the social and economic landscape. The population boomed, cities swelled, and the demand for land intensified. Aboriginal people were pushed to the fringes, their traditional way of life increasingly untenable. Colonial authorities implemented policies to assimilate Aboriginal people, forcibly removing children from their families. These policies, known as the Stolen Generations, left a legacy of cultural genocide and intergenerational trauma. The spreading stain of colonization left an indelible mark on the Australian landscape. The arrival of Europeans brought new diseases, technologies, and ways of life. The delicate balance that had existed for millennia was forever altered. The impact of colonization continues to reverberate through Aboriginal communities today. Despite overwhelming odds, Aboriginal people never surrendered their claim to their ancestral lands. Acts of resistance, both large and small, continued to challenge colonial authority. Armed conflicts like the Kalkadoon Wars in Queensland saw Aboriginal warriors fighting settlers. Cultural survival, preserving language, song, dance, and ceremony was another form of resistance. Elders found ways to maintain traditions, often in secret. Inspired by global movements, Aboriginal activists began to organise, demanding recognition of their rights. The struggle for Aboriginal rights became a defining feature of Australian society. This movement challenged the nation to confront its colonial past and forge a more just future. The discovery of gold in the mid-19th century transformed Australia, attracting immigrants and investment. The gold rushes triggered rapid economic growth and social upheaval. People from all over the world flocked to the goldfields, creating a melting pot of cultures. The influx of new arrivals brought new skills and ideas, contributing to a diverse society. However, the gold rushes also exacerbated tensions between settlers and Aboriginal people. Discriminatory policies limited the participation of Chinese miners. The gold rushes exposed underlying inequalities and injustices in colonial society. The golden illusion of wealth came at a heavy cost for many. The legacy of dispossession, discrimination, and cultural loss endures. As the gold rushes subsided, wool became the backbone of the Australian economy. The vast grasslands proved ideal for grazing sheep, transforming the landscape. The wool industry attracted hardy settlers who braved harsh conditions. They built sprawling sheep stations and established networks to transport wool. The wool boom made Australia a major agricultural powerhouse. Fortunes were made and lost on the sheep's back. The outback fostered a spirit of independence and self-reliance. This tension between the bush and the city became a recurring theme in Australian history. The wool industry played a pivotal role in shaping the nation's social and political landscape. The expansion of the wool industry had consequences for Aboriginal people. Settlers occupied land that had been home to Aboriginal groups for generations. The colonial authorities turned a blind eye to these land grabs, leading to squatting. Squatters cleared land, erected fences, and diverted water sources. The clash between pioneers and Aboriginal people often erupted into violence. Settlers, armed with superior weaponry, carried out massacres and reprisals. Aboriginal people fought back with guerrilla tactics. The frontier wars were marked by brutality and injustice. The legacy of this conflict continues to affect the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. The Australian outback tested the limits of human endurance. Pioneers faced scorching heat, droughts, floods, and isolation. Despite hardships, they persevered, driven by a spirit of adventure. They built homes, sank wells, and learned to read the land. The outback possessed a stark beauty that captivated the imagination. The vast open spaces and unique flora and fauna left an indelible mark. Life on the outback frontier was solitary and challenging. Neighbours relied on each other for help in times of need. This spirit of mateship became a defining characteristic of Australian culture. As the wool industry boomed, the violence of the frontier wars escalated. This brutal chapter saw widespread massacres and displacement of Aboriginal people. Some settlers viewed Aboriginal people as subhuman, forming vigilante groups. They hunted Aboriginal people and poisoned waterholes. The colonial government often declared martial law, allowing violence to continue. Aboriginal people fought back with courage and desperation. They launched raids and employed guerrilla tactics. However, their traditional weapons were no match for European guns. The Black War cast a long shadow over the Australian conscience. The true extent of the atrocities is still being uncovered. The legacy of this conflict continues to shape the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. As the 19th century ended, a sense of national identity emerged among the colonies. The wool industry, gold rushes, and agriculture brought wealth and population growth. The colonies began to recognize the benefits of cooperation and unity. They established intercolonial bodies to address common concerns. The idea of federation gained momentum in the latter half of the 19th century. Proponents argued that a united Australia would be stronger. They envisioned a nation with a strong central government and unified defence force. The movement for federation faced opposition. Some feared a powerful central government would erode colony autonomy. There were concerns about Indigenous rights in a federated Australia. Despite challenges, the momentum for federation continued to build. On the first day of the 20th century, a new nation was born. Representatives from the 6 colonies gathered in Sydney to witness the birth of the Commonwealth of Australia. The air crackled with excitement and anticipation. Federation marked a turning point in Australian history. Australia emerged as a unified force on the world stage. The new constitution enshrined democratic ideals and individual liberties. It established a federal system, dividing powers between the central government and the states. The Australian people embraced their newfound unity with pride and optimism. The new century dawned bright with possibility. The challenges ahead were many, including forging a national identity and addressing Indigenous rights. Yet, there was a palpable sense that Australia was ready to embrace its destiny. The cheers of the crowd echoed through Centennial Park, marking the beginning of a new era. The birth of the Commonwealth of Australia was accompanied by nationalistic fervour. The new nation sought to define what it meant to be Australian. This quest was intertwined with a desire to preserve white dominance. The White Australia policy restricted non-European immigration. The policy reflected fears of economic competition and a belief in white superiority. It created a society that was overwhelmingly white British. The policy stifled cultural diversity and reinforced prejudices. It also had a devastating impact on Indigenous Australians. The legacy of the White Australia policy continues to cast a long shadow over Australian society. While Sydney and Melbourne flourished as centres of commerce and culture, the vast Australian outback remained a place of rugged beauty and harsh realities. Life in the outback demanded resilience and resourcefulness. The outback pioneers, graziers, miners, and drovers shaped the national character. They embodied hard work, mateship, and a deep respect for the land. The outback, with its stark beauty and silence, captured the imagination of artists and writers. It became a symbol of the Australian spirit, testing one's true character. The outback held a strange allure, drawing adventurers seeking freedom and challenge. It was a place where legends were born, affirming the human spirit. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 sent shockwaves through the young nation of Australia. The conflict, which engulfed Europe and beyond in a maelstrom of unprecedented violence, tested the mettle of the fledgling nation and forged a new sense of national identity. Australia, eager to prove its loyalty to the British Empire and to forge its own destiny on the world stage, answered the call to arms with unwavering resolve. Thousands of young men, many of them from rural communities, enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force, eager to do their duty for king and country. They sailed across the world to fight in distant lands, their hearts filled with a mixture of patriotism, adventure, and trepidation. The Gallipoli campaign, a disastrous attempt to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey, would come to define Australia's experience in World War I. The ANZACs, as they became known, displayed extraordinary courage and resilience in the face of fierce Turkish resistance and appalling conditions. The Gallipoli landings, immortalised in art, literature and film, became a defining moment in Australian history, a symbol of national sacrifice and mateship. The legacy of Gallipoli, both tragic and inspiring, would forever shape Australia's sense of national identity and its place in the world. The horrors of World War I left an indelible mark on the Australian psyche. The nation, which had entered the conflict with a sense of youthful optimism, emerged scarred by the loss of over 60,000 lives and the physical and emotional wounds of a generation. The war had a profound impact on Australian society, challenging traditional social hierarchies, accelerating industrial development, and fostering a growing sense of national consciousness. The interwar years were a period of both progress and uncertainty. Australia experienced economic growth, driven by the expansion of manufacturing, mining, and agriculture. The rise of new technologies, such as the radio and the automobile, transformed daily life, while new social movements, such as the women's suffrage movement, challenged traditional values and power structures. However, the Great Depression of the 1930s brought this era of prosperity to a crashing halt. Australia, heavily reliant on exports of wool and other primary products, was hit hard by the global economic downturn. Unemployment soared, businesses collapsed, and many families faced hardship and uncertainty. The Depression had a profound impact on the Australian psyche, shaking confidence in the existing social and economic order and fueling the rise of new political ideologies, both on the left and the right. As the 1930s drew to a close, the world stood on the brink of another global conflict, one that would once again test the resilience and resolve of the Australian nation. The year 1939 cast a long shadow over Europe. The rise of Nazi Germany threatened to plunge the world into another devastating war. Australia, still grappling with the scars of the Great Depression, watched with growing apprehension. When Britain declared war on Germany, Australia followed suit without hesitation. Prime Minister Robert Menzies announced the nation's commitment to the Allied cause. The nation mobilised for war. The gathering storm had broken, and Australia found itself caught in the maelstrom of global conflict. The early years of World War II saw the AIF engaged in campaigns far from Australian shores. Australian troops fought with distinction in North Africa, Greece and Crete, displaying the same courage and tenacity that had marked their forebears at Gallipoli. The battles were fierce, the losses heavy, but the Australian spirit remained unbroken. The siege of Tobruk, where a small force of Australian and British troops held out against overwhelming odds for months, became a symbol of Allied defiance. The Greek campaign, though ultimately unsuccessful, saw acts of extraordinary heroism and sacrifice. The Battle of Crete, fought against German paratroopers, was one of the first major airborne assaults in history and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. Through these early campaigns, the AIF earned a reputation for its fighting spirit, its adaptability, and its unwavering commitment to its allies. The echoes of Gallipoli, the memory of those who had fallen in that distant conflict, resonated deeply within the ranks of the AIF. They fought not just for king and country, but for the memory of their fallen comrades, to honour their sacrifice and to ensure that their deaths had not been in vain. The bond of mateship, forged in the trenches of World War I and strengthened by the shared experiences of battle, became a defining characteristic of the AIF, a source of strength and solace in the face of adversity. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 dramatically altered the course of World War II, bringing the conflict to Australia's doorstep. The fall of Singapore in February 1942, a strategic disaster for the Allies, left Australia vulnerable to Japanese invasion. The nation braced itself for the possibility of attack, with coastal defences strengthened, blackouts enforced, and a sense of anxiety gripping the home front. The Japanese advance through Southeast Asia brought the war closer to home than ever before. The bombing of Darwin in February 1942, the first time Australian soil had been attacked by a foreign power, shattered any illusions of invincibility. The subsequent Japanese air raids on towns and cities along the northern coast, while causing relatively few casualties, heightened fears of a full-scale invasion. The Australian military, now focused on defending the homeland, fought alongside American forces in a desperate struggle to halt the Japanese advance. The New Guinea campaign, fought in the jungles and mountains of that vast island, was a grueling and costly affair, marked by fierce fighting, disease and exhaustion. The Battle of Milne Bay, the Battle of Kokoda Track, and the Battle of Bunagona were just a few of the brutal engagements that tested the mettle of both sides. The Pacific War was a crucible forging a new sense of national identity and a lasting bond between Australia and the United States. The ANZAC legend, born on the beaches of Gallipoli, found new resonance in the crucible of World War II. The Australian soldiers, sailors and airmen who fought in the Pacific, North Africa and Europe embodied the values of courage, sacrifice and mateship that had come to define the ANZAC spirit. They faced overwhelming odds, endured unimaginable hardships, and fought with a tenacity that earned the respect of their allies and enemies alike. The Kokoda Track campaign, where Australian troops, outnumbered and outgunned, fought a desperate rearguard action against the Japanese in the treacherous Owen Stanley Range of New Guinea, became a testament to the enduring power of the ANZAC spirit. The spirit of mateship, of looking out for one another, of never leaving a comrade behind, sustained them through the darkest of times. The stories of courage and sacrifice, of ordinary men and women performing extraordinary feats of bravery, became part of the national narrative, inspiring future generations and shaping Australia's understanding of itself. The ANZAC legend, forged in blood and mateship, transcended the horrors of war, becoming a symbol of national unity, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Section 5. A World Transformed, the Dawn of a New Era. The end of World War II, in 1945, brought a sense of relief and jubilation. Australia emerged with a heightened sense of national identity and determination. The economy, boosted by wartime production, saw rapid growth. European migrants brought new skills and cultural influences. Women demanded greater equality and opportunity. The Snowy Mountains scheme symbolised national ambition. Diplomatic relations with Asian nations recognised Australia's place in the Asia-Pacific. The war revealed Australia's resilience and capacity for innovation. Section 1. The Lucky Country. Post-World War II, Australia saw unprecedented prosperity and optimism. Global demand for Australian resources fueled an economic boom. Jobs were plentiful, wages rose, and a new generation thrived. The Menzies era saw new suburbs, highways, and infrastructure. Australia became known as the Lucky Country, a land of opportunity. Coined by Donald Horne, the term critiqued Australia's complacency, yet deep-seated inequalities persisted, especially for Indigenous Australians. Section 2. Bridging the divide, the 1967 referendum. The year 1967 marked a watershed moment in the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. The Australian Constitution, as originally drafted, contained clauses that discriminated against Aboriginal people, excluding them from the census and denying the federal government the power to make laws for their welfare. The 1967 referendum, a landmark event in Australian history, sought to amend the Constitution to address these injustices. The referendum proposed two key changes: to count Aboriginal people in the census, recognising them as full citizens of Australia, and to empower the federal government to make laws for Aboriginal people, potentially leading to greater equality and opportunity. The campaign for the referendum galvanised the nation, with Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians working side by side to advocate for change. The referendum was overwhelmingly supported by the Australian people, with over 90% voting yes, in what remains the highest yes vote in any Australian referendum to date. The 1967 referendum was a triumph for social justice and a testament to the growing recognition of the need to address the legacy of injustice faced by Indigenous Australians. It paved the way for further reforms, including the establishment of land rights legislation and the recognition of native title, marking a significant step towards reconciliation and a more just and equitable Australia. The post-war immigration boom had a profound impact on Australian society, transforming it from a predominantly Anglo-Celtic nation into a vibrant, multicultural mosaic. The Australian government, seeking to boost the population and address labour shortages, implemented policies that encouraged immigration from Europe, particularly from war-torn countries like Italy, Greece and Germany. These new Australians, as they were known, brought with them their languages, their cultures, their cuisines and their traditions, enriching the fabric of Australian life. The influx of immigrants presented challenges as well as opportunities. Newcomers often faced discrimination, prejudice and language barriers as they struggled to adapt to their new home. However, they also brought with them a strong work ethic, a determination to succeed, and a willingness to embrace Australian values of fairness and mateship. Over time, the contributions of immigrants were recognised and celebrated as Australian society became more accepting of cultural diversity. The abolition of the White Australia policy in the 1970s marked a formal end to decades of discriminatory immigration practices, paving the way for a more inclusive and multicultural Australia. The changing face of Australia, a reflection of its immigrant history and its growing engagement with the Asia-Pacific region, would continue to shape its national identity in the decades to come. The 1967 referendum, while a significant victory for Indigenous rights, did not address the fundamental issue of land ownership. Aboriginal people, dispossessed of their ancestral lands for generations, began to mobilise, demanding recognition of their inherent rights to the land. The land rights movement, which gained momentum in the 1970s, challenged the very foundations of Australian law and history, asserting that Aboriginal people had never ceded sovereignty over their lands, and that their connection to country was fundamental to their cultural identity and spiritual well-being. The movement gained national and international attention, with high-profile protests, legal challenges, and the establishment of Aboriginal-controlled land councils to manage traditional lands. The struggle for land rights was met with resistance from some quarters, particularly from those with vested interests in the pastoral and mining industries, who feared the economic implications of recognising Aboriginal land ownership. However, the movement also garnered support from a growing number of non-Indigenous Australians who recognised the justice of the Aboriginal cause. The passage of the Aboriginal Land Rights Northern Territory Act in 1976 was a landmark achievement, granting Aboriginal people title to vast tracts of land in the Northern Territory and establishing a framework for land claims in other parts of the country. Section 5. Towards Reconciliation, a long and winding road. The closing decades of the 20th century witnessed a growing awareness of the need for reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. The Bringing Them Home report, tabled in Parliament in 1997, exposed the devastating impact of past government policies of forced removal of Aboriginal children from their families, known as the stolen generations. The report's findings sparked a national conversation about the legacy of injustice faced by Indigenous Australians and the need for healing and reconciliation. In 2008, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd delivered a historic apology to the stolen generations, acknowledging the profound grief, suffering, and loss caused by past government policies. The apology, watched by millions of Australians, was a watershed moment, marking a significant step towards national healing and reconciliation. The journey towards reconciliation, however, is ongoing, complex, and often challenging. It requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about the past, to acknowledge the ongoing impact of colonization, and to work together to create a more just and equitable future for all Australians. It is a journey that demands empathy, understanding, and a shared commitment to building a nation where all Australians feel a sense of belonging and pride in their shared history. Australia, a nation forged from ancient lands and diverse cultures, stands at a crossroads in its history. The echoes of its colonial past and the dispossession faced by Indigenous Australians demand acknowledgement and justice. The journey towards reconciliation is long, requiring confronting truths and working together. Recognising native title and land rights legislation were significant milestones, yet gaps in health, education, and economic outcomes remain. Australia's multicultural character, shaped by immigration, defines its modern identity. Addressing racism and promoting inclusivity are ongoing tasks demanding vigilance and commitment. Section 2. The Australian Identity, a work in progress. What does it mean to be Australian in the 21st century? The Australian identity is a work in progress, a tapestry woven from a multitude of threads. Mateship, fairness, and a love of the land resonate deeply within the Australian psyche. These values are being reinterpreted in light of changing social norms and the need for inclusivity. Section 3. Navigating the 21st century, challenges and opportunities. As Australia navigates the complexities of the 21st century, it faces a number of challenges and opportunities that will shape its future. The globalized economy, while creating opportunities for trade and investment, also presents challenges in terms of competition, technological disruption, and the need to adapt to changing workforce demands. Climate change, a pressing global issue, poses particular challenges for Australia, with its vast arid interior, its vulnerable coastal communities, and its reliance on agriculture and natural resources. The need to transition to a low-carbon economy, to invest in renewable energy, and to adapt to the impacts of climate change will require innovative solutions, political will, and a commitment to sustainability. Australia's strategic location in the Asia-Pacific region, a region of dynamic economic growth and geopolitical significance, presents both opportunities and challenges. Strengthening ties with Asian neighbours, promoting regional stability, and navigating the complexities of great power rivalry will be crucial to Australia's future prosperity and security. Australia's greatest asset as it faces these challenges is its people. Their resilience, their ingenuity, their compassion, and their unwavering belief in the power of collective action to shape a better future.